Okay, I think I'm ready. First rule of running a conference, start your talk on time. How many of you have been to one of my conferences before? Okay, so that's about a quarter. Don't worry about taking notes. Eventually I'll put the slides up. Follow that Twitter account and I'll let you know where they are. I've been running conferences since about 2004. Over that time period I've run about 17 conferences. To make matters difficult for myself, I decided to start a conference, never having run one on my own before. I can't imagine anyone that's done that or not done that, actually, because everyone who runs a conference for the first time is doing it for the first time. To make it more difficult for myself, in 2007, I decided to leave the country and start running the conference remotely. It's not actually that much harder to run it remotely than it is to run locally. The two conferences that I'm best known for are BSDcon and PGCon. There's a couple of other conferences that I've run way in my distant past, and they're not really relevant anymore. It's open source weekend. I didn't run those all on my own, but they gave me an insight on how to run a conference. Okay. You may think you're running the conference all on your own, but you're not. When I say I'm running it on my own, I'm lying. There's volunteers. Sorry? You knew that? You knew that? Okay. There's volunteers, there's suppliers, there's caterers, and the main thing for the volunteers is they get involved very close to the day.
Volunteers, you mean you carry the box?
Yep. Anyone who's been to BSDcon and has been standing around in the lobby at the inappropriate time, meaning the beginning of the day, you'll find that I'll walk up to you and say, "Here, come with me, please, carry this box." That's how I get a lot of the volunteers. But the thing to remember is that you, as conference organizer, you're the one that actually does all the work. You're the one that makes the things happen. Other people don't necessarily know what needs to be done, but you do, and you tell them to do it. All right. This is a complicated bit. If you're in this talk, the chances are you're a novice. You've never run a conference before. That's who I'm aiming this talk at. I'm not aiming it at people who have already run a conference, because clearly you know how to run a conference. So this talk isn't set up to be a criticism of people who are already running conferences. It's to give you an insight into what I know about running conferences, with the proviso that someone once told me, "Dan, you run a good conference." And I said, "Well, I really don't know what I'm doing." That's not sarcasm. I had no idea what it was to do right when it comes to running a conference. But I've come up with a few key points. One, you've got to be highly organized, so that rules most of you out. You've got to be the type of person that's walking along and you see trash in the street and you want to pick it up. You're the type of person that you walk into a shopping center and you see a mat in front of the door that has a ripple in it and you want to straighten it out so no one trips on it. You're the type of person that sees a typo on a web page and you email the owner of the web page to tell them about it. You're the type of person that sees a great file system in a complex operating system and decides to port it to your own operating system. You see a situation, you want to improve it. That's the type of person that works well as a conference organizer. You've got a strong drive to complete tasks, because believe me, there's a lot of tasks to do as part of a conference organizer. You can easily decide between right and wrong. You don't have to talk to a committee about it. In fact, involving a committee soaks up more of your time than it does actually doing the work. You don't give up. You can delegate to others and say, "Hey, listen, if someone wants video, you guys do it. I don't want to be involved in it." And you let that group tackle everything related to video, and they don't put any work back on you. If you don't think those characteristics apply to you, believe me, they will by the time you finish running the conference. It's also useful to have 6 months of spare time to give up. It's also useful to be unemployed. Don't let all of this discourage you, okay? It sounds worse than it is, but it's not as bad as I'm making it sound. You got to be thick-skinned because you're going to receive a lot of criticism. But keep in mind that those people criticizing you have never run a conference. The people that have run a conference will be giving you advice, not criticism, and there's a big difference between the two. Oh, and like volunteers in an open source project, the people doing the work get to decide how it's done, and that's you, the conference organizer. All right. This is actually more important than you think. You have to keep in mind what a conference is. Don't get away from the fact that it's people and a subject. That's the important thing. Don't get sidetracked into other issues. I can't give you an example of what it is, but stick to your core conference activities, talks, that's it. Don't get involved in things that you don't want to do just because people say it's a good idea to do this. Just stick with your basics. Now, key points about a conference. The main thing, pick a topic. Doesn't matter what it is. You've got a bunch of people who are interested in that topic, get them together to talk about it. Your audience basically is users, developers, or both. Some people say it's hard to appeal to both groups, but often they have a lot more in common than they have in differences. So get them all together, sort of listen. Sorry. Get them together, get them talking to each other, because often the developers want to hear from the users, and the users have valuable input to give to the developers. Often my program committee will say, well, what are we? Are we for users or are we for developers? And I say, well, actually, we're for both. And how do we do that? You just take talks from both sides. Sometimes they're very technical, sometimes they're very light and fluffy. And it doesn't really matter. It will appeal to both groups. But keep it in mind that you're getting people together to talk about various things. That's the main thing. I don't know where we're now. Now, what people will expect is quality talks that inform and educate. You need to be able to give people that opportunity to get together and talk about things, and then afterwards give them time to talk about what they just talked about. A lot of the activity at a conference is not primarily the talk. It's the talk about the talk. You get together afterwards over drinks, over something else, and you're talking about what the people talked about. I went to a talk once given by Rasmus, the PHP guy, and one of the things he mentioned was error handling. And you can create custom error pages in PHP using the Apache error doc routine. And I said, oh wow, I can use that for fresh ports. And now the entire basis is fresh ports is based over one little 2-minute bit out of his lecture. And then I talked to people about that and they said, oh yeah, you can do that. It's very easy. You just do it this way. So the whole point of his talk was lost on me, but it was just that tiny little bit. And you don't want to miss that tiny little bit of the talk that may be useful to you. Quality talks. What defines a quality talk? Wow. That's really hard to define. It's very subjective. Some people might think a talk is really great because it appeals to them. But not all talks will appeal to everyone. Not everyone likes lager. Not everyone likes a heavy ale. But overall, somebody will find something that they like. The best complaint you can get as a conference organizer is you've got too many talks at the same time. I want to see 2 talks or both at the same time. Well, I'm sorry. Too bad. Don't worry about that. Just work with it. You want to help the people with their interests and their jobs and their hobbies, and that's what the talks will give you. All right. Social time is very important. You want people to get together to talk about the talks. That social time can come before your talks, after your talks, in between your talks. It will just work. How am I doing for time? How much time do I have left? Somebody tell me? Half an hour? Okay, good. Don't do this. Don't run a conference, okay? This is my final warning, because it's harder than you think. It involves just a little bit of time and stress. I should have told you this a while ago. This one's that. It will eat up all your time for 6 months. You will have no spare time. You won't see your friends. You'll hardly see your kids. You won't get any work done because all your time's going to be involved in running the conference. I was when I ran the first one. It's a steep learning curve, but you're going to learn a lot, and the next one will be easier. Trust me. All the others after the first one get easier. It's a seemingly endless stream of tasks that have to be done, and you just have to coordinate them, get them done in the right order. I'll show you the order that I do mine in. It's very draining, but it's highly rewarding. When I took the podium, the closing session of BSDcon 2004, which was the first conference I ran on my own, everyone stood up and applauded, and it brought tears to my eyes. Yeah, I still get emotional thinking about that. Okay. The next slide is, what do attendees want? No. Oh, I asked a friend of mine, Dana, who ran conferences professionally. She ran conferences for medical professionals. And I said, how do you run a conference? And she said, you set a budget and you stick to it. That was no help at all to me. I had no idea what she meant by that. But yeah, that is important too. Have a budget, know how much money is coming in, and don't spend more than that. So, what do speakers need? Keep in mind that speakers are your biggest asset and also your biggest liability in terms of cost. All right? They basically need accommodation and travel paid for because most of them can't afford to come to the talks without it. Some speakers can pay their own way, and if they can, make sure that they are listed as sponsors, whether that's them personally or their employers. You have a choice of either reimbursing up front or paying for it, reimbursing the speakers after the conference or paying it for up front. I prefer to pay for it up front. Basically, reimbursing is lower risk. The speaker doesn't turn up, you don't have to pay. That said, in 17 conferences, or roughly 300 tickets, there's only been 2 not used, and it's due to illness. That's roughly 1%. So that said, it's not worth taking the travel insurance. Speakers need to know their expected talk duration. Do I register? Do I pay? Are tutorials included? Where do I turn up? When do I turn up? Things like that. So keep that in mind, in that your speakers need to know different things from what your attendees need to know. Attendees need to know a lot of stuff. Try and include as much of this information as you can on the website. Make it easy to find. I'm going to show you some examples of how not to do your website. You go to the website, you heard about this conference, you go to the website, oh good, this sounds really, really interesting. Where is it? There's this great conference. It's on ZFS, but I don't know where it is. Is it in, I don't know what city it's in. I'll give you this example next. When you're doing your websites, oh, sorry, different slide. So where do you start? Start first with your website. Get your website up, let people know what's going on. Concentrate on letting them know the venue. Get your suppliers in order, your suppliers of catering, your rooms, your t-shirts, your lanyards, your conference bags, stuff like that. Get that all lined up. Talk to your sponsors, get them arranged, let them know what they can expect. Get your speakers organized and get your attendees. And basically it's in that order, believe it or not. That is your priority. That's the priority that I place on it. Okay, now where are we now? Sponsorship. Have a list that the sponsors can come and look at. This is what I get in exchange for this. Make sure you deliver on what you say you're going to give them. If it's, inserts in the registration pack or signage or mentions during the conference, have that all spelled out. Never ever say anything bad about any sponsor anywhere. It will get back to them. Even if you're bitching about them and they're giving you a hard time, don't say anything. It will get back to them. And you don't want sponsors hearing you saying anything bad about them, okay? Just, not that I've had that happen to me, but I've seen big professional conferences seen that happen, and it's been disastrous. Payment methods. Some people don't like PayPal, some people don't mind it. Decide how you're going to accept payment. That's very important. Get all that organized very early. Have that all ready and tested long before you open registration. Make registration easy, easier than BSDcon. It's a little complex. The main thing about the website, people come there, they want to know where the conference is and when it is. Everything else is not important until they can figure out that. They want to know when it is because of their schedule. They want to know where it is for travel. If those two criteria don't match what they need, they're not going to be interested in the rest of the website. Have this clearly visible on the front page. Oops. All right. This is the website that I wanted. This is what I was interested in. But I couldn't tell. Can anyone tell from this page where it is, even if you could read it from the back of the room? You can't. It doesn't say where the conference is. It says when it is, but it doesn't say where it is. It's not until you go to the registration page that it tells you it's in San Francisco. Sorry, I didn't want to go to San Francisco. It was too far. If it was in New York or something like that, it was close enough to me. But you couldn't tell without going to the registration page. Don't do this. Here's another conference. These are just ones that I came across in the week or two before this conference. What you had to do to get the list of speakers, I looked under sessions, and all I saw was call for participation, speakers, FAQ, and speakers. I couldn't see a list of the talks. What you had to do was click on the sessions thing to get the list of the talks. If you hovered your mouse over it, you get this drop-down menu. But clicking on sessions is where you found the list of sessions. Don't do that. That's a silly way to do it. I couldn't find it. I told them, they didn't change it. Too bad. Traps for young players. Non-core activities. Don't get involved in organizing a trip to the latest movie that's come out during the conference unless someone else wants to do that. Delegate that off to someone else. Stick only with your core activities. Letters of invitation. If you're not familiar with this, some people will require a letter of invitation which helps them with visa requirements. The requirements for this letter vary from country to country, so you have to decide what needs to go on that based on you. But be aware that there will be people who will ask for a letter of invitation that you've never heard of, they haven't registered, and they have an address somewhere in Africa, most typically. Don't even bother to reply to them, and you won't hear from them again. But if you do reply, they'll say, oh, listen, I can't pay until then. Can I pay cash when I arrive? It's a scam. I don't know what they're using it for. I don't know what they want the letter of invitation for, but just don't waste your time. But if someone has registered and they've paid and they look legit, then yeah, send them a letter of registration. Otherwise, ignore it. Payables. Keep track of what you owe and to who. Anywhere, just even in a spreadsheet or a notebook or something, just keep track of that and keep a track of who owes you and whether or not they've paid you. That's more important than who you've paid, okay? Because who you haven't paid, they'll remind you. But if someone owes you money, they won't, okay? So keep track of that. Know what your tax liability is. It may not sound like a big deal, but if you're doing it personally, it may have different implications as whether or not you set up a company or you have a nonprofit or something like that set up. I've got a company set up just to isolate me from any legal issues that may arise with the company. If one of you comes to Ottawa and falls down a flight of stairs at the conference, you can sue the company, but you can't take away my car. All right? And there may be laws relating to how you can do this in your own area. So keep that in mind. Wrong one. Okay. This is an idea of how I lay out the time I spend in the months coming up to the conference. Now, I don't know if I've got, yeah. About 7 months before the conference, announce your venue. I said it only takes up about 6 months of your time. This tells you otherwise. Basically, 7 months in advance, you have to tell people, hey, listen, I'm having a conference. Get ready. Come here. Why do you have to have that much time? Because people plan things well in advance. Speakers are booked well in advance. You want to pick your time so that you're not near another conference. I think the minimum between your conference and someone else's conference, if you think it's going to be competing, is at least 2 months. If you can have it further away than that, do it more. Definitely don't have it a few weeks before or after some other major conference that's on the same topic. Because not only are you depleting the attendee resources, more importantly, you're taxing the speaker resources, and you won't get the attendees without the speakers. About 5 months out, do your call for papers. Why do you have that lag? It's because people have been thinking about the conference already and saying, yeah, I think I'd like to go to that. I don't really want to pay for it. Yeah, I'll give a talk. About 3 months out, you will have told all the speakers, yes, you're coming, or sorry, no, we can't get you here. 3 months is basically the minimum amount of time that most people need in order to plan their travel, get travel expenses approved from work, get flights booked, hotels booked. It's not that they do that 3 months out, but they need that 3-month buffer. That's when you're going to be booking all your travel and accommodation for your speakers, unless you tell them to do it on their own. Either way works. You choose which one you want to do. 2 months out, you should have your t-shirts and catering booked. You'll notice that that's a long time before you actually know your numbers. You just have to take a guess on it, and closer to the day, you will tell your caterers and your suppliers, okay, this is how many I think I'm getting now. About 1 month out, you're frantic with registration. You're correcting all these things that people change their minds about, and that's your primary thing at that time, is you're dealing with registration issues. At that time, you should have a rough idea of your number for t-shirts. I've always found that registration numbers double in the last month, to give you an idea. It's very odd though. For PGCon, people tend to register early and numbers dwindle closer to the conference. For BSDcon, numbers start off slow and ramp up near the conference. So it depends on your audience. You thought it was just one page, didn't you? 3 days before the conference, in other words, the day before the tutorials, this is assuming you're following the 2 days of tutorials, 2 days of talks, patented formula that, the tutorials start. This is when basically everything should be done except for registration packs and stuff like that. I do the registration packs on the second day of tutorials, basically because I start handing them out later on that day. The way we do it is we need about 3 people for about 2 or 3 hours just to stuff packs and bags. Registration opens on the second day of tutorials. Day 1 is your opening session. Day 2 is your closing session, and you should announce the dates for next year then. Next year? Really? You want to do it again? Day 3, after the conference, you're packing up all the gear and disappearing. It's usually at the end of day 2, the beginning of day 3, that your stress level is going away, and you feel a lot better, and you start to feel human again. You start sleeping. Day 4, send out thank you notes to all your sponsors, every single one. Don't forget that. In about a month's time, you want to update the website for next year. I haven't done that. This is not a criticism. But when you're in a buffet line, you want the plates first because you're piling on the food, right? Because all your utensils are there. You don't want to be carrying the forks and the napkins in your back pocket. You want to get to the end of the line, and then you get the knives and the forks and the drinks and stuff, and then you walk away. If you ever see that at a catering line that's out of order, just go in, pick them up, and move them to the other end. No one will notice that you've done it, but everyone will be a lot happier. What? You're going to do it again? The problem with doing it again, let me see here, where were we? The biggest problem, or the biggest time consumption of your first conference is picking your venue and your suppliers. Once you have a good venue and good suppliers, keep using them. I've used the same, this will be the 10th year at EuroBSDcon. It's always been held at University of Ottawa. It's always had the same supplier of t-shirts, always had the same food caterers, always had the same people giving me the lanyards and the bags. Why do I keep using them? Because they've always delivered. They've never had a hassle, they've never made mistakes, they've always delivered on time with what I needed. So if you can find people who do that, keep using them. There's no sense in changing unless you really, really have to, because then you have to re-educate them as to what you want, and they have to learn what they need to deliver. Don't, if you can avoid wasting the time on changing, don't. The other advantage, if you've been to a conference before and it's at the same venue, it's a lot more comfortable for the attendees. They don't have to wander around trying to find the building, even though the buildings at BSD change every year. You know it's at the campus, you know it's at the university. So if you can have it in the same venue, it's more comfortable for the attendees and a lot less stress for you. So over here, and I would be surprised if nobody has questions, because there's a lot about this that I haven't covered. Ask.
Two questions. One, I'm sort of using insurance,
Mm-hmm.
and doing the final financial breakdown of the conference.
Your costs are going to vary. Okay, insurance, I don't have any.
But you very strongly advise against trying that.
Some venues will require you to have insurance. The venue I'm using doesn't require me to have insurance. And the way I'm looking at it, if someone decides to sue the company, there's not much money in there, and I'm not worried about it. That's why I've got the companies, to isolate me from personal liability. Finances, they vary according to your venue. For an example, at the University of Ottawa, one room for one day costs about $2,000, I think. But how much each individual thing costs won't help you, because all my costs are in Canadian dollars.
No, I meant when the conference is over,
Yep.
is when you can start drawing the final line and up.
Yep.
Hopefully.
It's useful to hire a professional bookkeeper and get them to keep track of all the finances. Or are you asking from a point of view of making sure you don't go broke?
Yeah.
Like my friend said, set a budget, figure out how much your venue is going to cost, then take an estimate on how many attendees you're going to have and see how that meets up when you guess how much you're going to get for sponsorship. When I first did it, 10 years ago, I figured it was going to cost me $4,000 to run the conference. And I figured if, based on a $200 attendee, I figured, what was that, the math? I needed, somebody do the math for me, 4,000 divided by 200. 20? 40? 20. I needed 20 people to break even. And it turned out I got about 150 or so. But then my expenses went up because I didn't include things like lunches. But I think actually we sent everyone out to lunch the first year because we had no idea how to do any of that. I'm not helping you, am I? I'm sorry. Any other questions? Sorry.
How do you deal with catastrophes like Wi-Fi breakdown or something? Catastrophes for some people.
We had Wi-Fi problems the first couple of years because we were doing it ourselves. And then the next couple of years, the university took it over. But then over the past 5 years, it's been pretty good. We have problems sometimes at the beginning of the day when they don't have it set up right. But that's usually during the tutorials. And by the conference proper, it's settled down and it runs quite well. Basically, apologize and stop worrying about it. Seriously. You can't solve all the problems. If you can, you solve it. If you can't, just say, I'm sorry folks, I can't fix this, and worry about the next thing. It's along the lines of compartmentalization. Solve this problem, move on to the next.
Unless the venue building burned down or something.
I've
apologize and move on.
How?
Because of course the university runs a lot of scientific conferences, but those are maybe older people. And so we didn't know how we will do with the Wi-Fi because we had maybe 200 attendees, but probably 2.5 devices per attendee. 500 devices.
It was kind of slow downloading the 9.2 ISO yesterday. But yeah, I haven't had any problem with them.
We have 200 megabit pipe to the internet, right? And the Wi-Fi is pretty good, but I can understand it can't handle 500 Wi-Fi.
One thing to consider when you pay for the travel of the speakers, but let them do their own orders. You will run into people that insist on booking their flight like 2 days before the conference.
Yep.
And that can really mess up your budget.
What you do then is you stipulate in advance that you basically make that well known. Don't leave it to the last minute.
To
Yeah.
pay something like this amount and no more, or something like
Yeah.
that, but tell them
Yeah.
it helps.
And what you do is you say, I'm sorry, I can't fix this, and you move on to the next problem. Seriously, you cannot fix everything, and do not take it personally if something goes wrong. You'll just devastate yourself, and shit happens. And you do as good as well as you can given the circumstances. And if something goes wrong, Pal, you'll know what this means. As a conference organizer, you see lots of things that have gone wrong, but you as a conference attendee don't see it. Maybe 1 or 2 of you see it, but that's all, and that doesn't matter. I think the biggest disaster I've had at a conference is having one speaker that didn't show up at all. They didn't tell me they weren't coming, they just didn't turn up. All I did was walked into the room, there were 2 people waiting for his talk. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't know where the speaker is. Would you like to come into one of the other talks? There's not much more you can do than that. More questions?
The biggest disaster last couple of years with conferences I've seen was an earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear power plants melt down. 5 days before EuroBSDcon.
Yep.
So you say sorry and move on.
That
There's nothing
is,
you can do about this anyway.
that is why you need to get a company or other legal entity and take the risk from you.
Mm-hmm.
Because speakers have booked their flights, you have got bills waiting on your desk.
Mm-hmm.
There are attendees insisting on getting a refund and stuff like that.
Yep. I think the biggest problem we had was when the volcanic ash was up over Iceland 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Yeah.
2.5 years.
We had trouble getting speakers to the conference, and I was getting calls at 3 a.m. trying to book flights for people from Heathrow. And that was a much bigger expense because you had to book your flights the same day. Fortunately, it was only 2 speakers, but it was less sleep.
Most were right on the way back.
You won't get, some nights you won't get any sleep, but don't worry about that. You can sleep after the conference.
How do you do the handover if somebody wants to next year, somebody else wants to?
Keep notes. I actually keep a repository in CVS of everything that I'm doing. All the procedures, like this is how I print the badges. This is how I update the website for next year. That's all in CVS. Pick your repository. But basically document what you're doing and maybe why you're doing it. I'll give you a good example of why you document why you're doing it. Friend of mine was having her mother help her put away the dishes from the dishwasher. And her mother said, "Where do these little plastic cups go? These little plastic glasses?" She said, "Down there with the pots and pans." Why would the little plastic cups go down there with the plastic why would the little plastic cups go down there with the pots and pans? And she said, "So the kids can get a drink without having to ask us for glasses." Think about that when you're doing something weird in your code. Okay? It doesn't make sense until you give that explanation, and then it's perfectly sensible. Another question? Anything? I think I started PGCon in 2009, 2010. So I was doing BSDcon for about 3 or 4 years, probably up to about 220 people max. And then I took on PGCon, which happens the week after. So in effect, I'm running 2 conferences in 2 weeks with a total of about 440 people. So I imagine I could do 1 conference with 450 people in 1 week, because I'm doing it over 2 weeks, so it doesn't make much difference. So it's about the same. So imagine the only problem there is the venue. I don't have a venue big enough to handle 450 people. But yeah, torture. So basically the things to do, if you think running 1 conference has become too easy, what you do is you move to another country and run it from there. Then what you do is you break your arm and have surgery a little while before the conference. Then what you do is you start running 2 conferences within 2 weeks of each other for different groups. Yeah.
What's your personal next challenge for yourself?
I would actually like to become a professional conference organizer. I enjoy it. I find it challenging, but I find it natural as well. I'm not lying when someone asks me, "You're really good at this, what are you doing?" And I say, I really don't know how to run a conference. I couldn't highlight the things to do right or wrong. I just knew that this was the way to do it, and I don't know how I knew that. So I'd like to be a professional conference organizer if I could do that. The problem is income. I don't think I could make a living at it. I think I could make a living at it if I tripled the admission prices, but I don't think I'd get the attendees. Any other? Yeah.
How do you find sponsors for your first conference? Because it's unknown.
Yeah. Well, the first BSD conference didn't have very big sponsors. One of the, where are we? Over here. If you go to BSDcon/2004, you'll see that the sponsors aren't very well-known companies. They were local companies basically providing people to help out. As time went on, I'm now at the point of where Google will send me an email saying, "Hi Dan, BSDcon 2013 is coming up. Here's our purchase order." So they're telling me that they're going to sponsor before I ask them. I always go back to my original sponsors from the previous year, get in touch with them 6-7 months before the new conference. You outline what you can provide and say, we can't run this conference without sponsorship. These are the benefits of being a sponsor. Thank you very much. And basically, you look at the other conferences, see who's sponsoring them, and approach the same group. Because if someone's interested in EuroBSDcon, they're probably interested in something very similar somewhere else. But sponsorship's the hardest thing. We get about 50% from Europe, and the rest are from Canada and the States. And we get, say, PGCon gets 3 or 4 people from Japan, 1 or 2 from Australia and New Zealand, a couple from somewhere in Africa, a couple from somewhere in South America, and then by far the vast majority are from the European Union. And the rest are from the States and Canada.
And I wonder if you can deal with university to allow the students to attend for free in exchange for the venue?
I can ask you a question, but I have to elaborate on that.
I remember there were not many students interested, and here we have a lot of students actually interested.
I started off offering free for staff, faculty, and students because they were giving us very useful things like here's the internet, use it, stuff like that. But now they're charging us for the internet, so it's a much more commercial setup now. We pay commercial rates for the venue. So I'm thinking of actually changing that from free to a modest fee, basically because we have to set aside meal, t-shirt, all that stuff for people who sign up and then don't show up. So out of about 10 to 15 people that sign up for the free option, only 3 or 4 turn up. So when you're planning your catering, you don't actually order the catering for the number of people that you have on the list. You order for about 80 to 90% of the people that you have on your list. Surprisingly.
Yeah, because actually we were ordering more than that, just for the time we want.
Yep. The other thing is the t-shirts. Don't run out of t-shirts. People want the t-shirts more than they want the conference. More questions? Sorry? Some sponsors, the biggest thing that some sponsors want is your names and addresses. And I don't give it to them. And the reason I don't is because I don't think that's proper. The second biggest thing they want is to put things in the registration pack. They want to put their marketing material in front of you. The other thing they want is signs right here, because it'll be on the video. The other thing you can do is to get someone to pay for the video is to have a splash page at the beginning of the video with the sponsor's name on it. That's worth a lot of money. Don't undersell that, because that's permanent. The lanyards and the bags are temporary. The video lasts a very long time, and it'll have the sponsor's name on there for a very long time. So don't sell that off cheap. Does that answer your question? Yeah. But yeah, your names on the bags, names on the lanyards, names on the videos, that's all worth a lot of money, and don't undersell it.
This is only exposure for the sponsor, but I think that the more important bit here is what basically sponsors get in return. So they want to recruit people, they want to show their products,
Mhm.
find some customers, or
Yep.
what's the real...
One of the big things that they want at BSDcon is a jobs board. Just a bulletin board there that has pieces of paper that says, we're looking for people to fill these positions. Okay. It's time to finish. Yeah?
What do you think about offering time slots to sponsors? You know, that
Yeah.
you can only offer one or two.
Do you, yeah, one of the things we don't do, one of the things I don't do is allow commercial talks. Sure, if the sponsor wants to submit a talk, it'll be evaluated the same as any other talk. But we don't say, okay, you're a sponsor, here's your 15 minutes to sit in front of everyone and talk. I don't do that. Commercial. It's a non-commercial conference. If it was a sales conference or something like that, it would be different. But basically, it's the integrity of the talks. We don't sell conference slots. We'll sell spots in the bag and the signage, but we don't sell slots. If you have any other questions, find me. I think you'll be able to locate me easily. Thank you.